What I want to talk about today is I want to talk about shooting and capturing tapeless media. There's really 5 areas that we want to talk about. One is pre-production, getting yourself ready to do a tapeless shoot. Second is what you need to do when you're on set. Third is transferring and naming files as you're copying them as part of the DIT process. The actual ingesting process and the archiving process. Let's start first by taking a look at pre-production. The world is tapeless. The reason the world has gone tapeless as quickly as it has is the camera manufacturers realized that the #1 problem they had in terms of technical support and gear breaking down was not the camera and not the sensor, it was the actual tape recording mechanism inside the camera. As soon as they could get rid of that, they would cut their support costs down and they could change the form factor of the camera. When you had to put a video recorder inside a camera, you were locked in terms of the weight, you were locked in terms of the shape, and you could only record the format that that recorder inside your camera could record, which locked you into a frame rate, it locked you into an image size. As soon as we went to tapeless, it opened up the wide panoply of different frame rates that we deal with today, different image sizes, even different recording formats, because now we're recording digitally as opposed to the mechanical constructs limited by tape. But tapeless also means, in most cases, that your masters, that which the camera shoots, only lasts as long as it takes to transfer them to the hard disk inside your computer. Then, in a phrase that just terrifies me from a tape background, we erase the camera master, put the card back in the camera, and continue recording. The phrase, erase your master, I think should just be banned from the vocabulary. This is like living way too far past the edge. The first thing you want to check is whether your camera is compatible with your editing software. Not all cameras are supported by all software. Now, there are 3 websites. If you go to adobe.com/products/premiere/extend.html, this is a list of all the supported graphics cards, the Windows minimum specs for your computer, the Macintosh minimum specs, and the cameras that it supports. For Apple, if you go to apple.com, Final Cut Pro/resources, it's a list of all supported cameras. And the third is if you go to avid.com, followed by that line of text, that'll describe all the cameras that Avid supports. One of the key things to understand is a lot of times cameras that are recently released are not yet supported by software. And I get a lot of emails every day with people saying, how come Final Cut doesn't work? Because you're working with a camera that Final Cut doesn't support. Producers tend to make the decision that the best camera to shoot for their project is the camera that they own. That's not the best camera. The best camera is the one that delivers the file format that you need. So the very first thing you want to check is my camera compatible? Then you want to think about the delivery of your program. In the past, we would shoot, in the States, we would call it digibeta. Here we call it digibeta. Whatever it is, you shoot the digi format. It tells us the camera we're going to use, tells us the tape we're going to record on, tells us how we're going to ingest, tells us how we're going to capture. We basically pick the camera, and that's the workflow from beginning to end. In high def, it's the exact opposite. What's your delivery? Am I delivering 720p? Am I delivering 1080i? Am I delivering 1080p? And from the delivery, you back up to figure out what your camera is going to be. Where you get caught in a jam is when you grab the camera without thinking about your delivery mechanism. You got to think about it from the backwards to the front. You want to shoot to match the image size and the frame rate of the final delivery master. This is actually a big deal because it is much easier to convert progressive to interlaced than to shoot interlaced and convert interlaced to progressive. It's easy to convert to any codec. If you shoot H.264 and need to deliver ProRes, or you shoot AVC HD, you need to deliver, say, a DNX HD master, that's easy. Converting codecs is easy. What's hardest to convert is the frame rate. If you shoot at, say, 30 frames a second and need to deliver 24, that's a hard frame rate conversion to make. It's easier to go from 24 to 30 than from 30 to 24, because when we go 24 to 30, we just put in imaginary frames. When we go 30 to 24, we got to take out frames, which means if you got movement, you're going to have jerky movement. So you want to think about your frame rate. It's easy to go 25 to 50 or 30 to 60 or 60 to 30 or 50 to 25, but shooting 24 and needing to move up or shooting 30 and needing to move down is a problem. Also a note about the web. If you're shooting for the web, the best delivery format for the web, in my recommendation, is 720p. Every monitor can play, every computer monitor can play 720p. 720p upscales to 1080 without too much difficulty. You get excellent web playback. You have limited file size in case you have to pay for download bandwidth. And it also gives you a good display on all computer monitors. We could argue that 1080p is a better image size because you've got more pixels to deal with, but if people are scaling that down to be able to look at on a computer monitor, the pixels that you shoot and the bandwidth that you're spending are not worth the money that you have. The big issue is the bandwidth of the final mile. To give you an example of the differences, I was talking with Phil Ashby, who's a Final Cut trainer over in the west of England, and he recently has fiber to the home. Thank you very much. 800 gazillion megabits down. He can transfer 4 gigabyte files in 2.5 hours. My uplink connection is 100K up. That's it. And I only have 1,000K down because we're far enough away from the telephone company that I can't get high-speed access. You don't have control over what the high-speed up or downlink is. And you can't assume that everybody's got the same delivery spec that you do. So one of the things you got to be careful of is if you've got a really high-speed connection, don't assume everybody else has got the same thing. I sell products all over the world, and I am stunned on a daily basis with who's got really high-speed connection and who's got really slow-speed connection, and it varies within the same area of the same country. There's 2 basic groups of codecs. If we take a look at the group called AVC HD or H.264, the earlier version which is MPEG-2 or the more recent version which is MPEG-4, all of these generate very, very small file sizes. However, all of them are very compressed. They lose data. They create image artifacts when you enlarge them. The reason we use these small codecs is because the recording mechanism that we use, these little chips that we record on, the SDHD or the SDHX cards that are inside our camera, have a very low data transfer rate. They can't record data fast enough to take it uncompressed. So we have to compress the image. The benefit is these file codecs create very small sizes. The disadvantage is that the quality is not that great when you compare them to uncompressed codecs, which would include ProRes or DNX HD, Cineform, or RAW. The benefit here, these have large file sizes. They have limited to no compression. They have few to no compression artifacts. They're optimized for render speed, they're optimized for export speed, and they deliver not the 8-bit color depth of the earlier codecs, but 10, 12, even 16-bit color depth. And the greater the bit depth, the more accurately you can represent reality. So a 16-bit codec is going to do a much better job of accurately representing colors and gradients than an 8-bit codec. A 16-bit codec is going to do a better job with color grading than an 8-bit codec. So what we're trading off is slow write speeds to a card, small file size, that's at the low end of the codecs, to very large file sizes but improved quality. There's reasons for both. There's reasons that you would want to use one or the other, but you need to understand what the differences are. Once we move on set, we have a new role that suddenly showed up. It's called the DIT, the Digital Imaging Technician. This is the person who's responsible for transferring the images that are captured in the camera, transferring them to the computer. Ideally, this needs to be a dedicated position, and you need to give it to somebody that's responsible, because what this position is insurance. You've spent a lot of time and effort and money shooting a particular scene. You need to copy that scene from the card to your hard disks. Somebody needs to be sure and responsible that all that media is captured securely and stored safely. Depending upon the size of your production, they need to transfer media from the camera source to the computer. They need to accurately name and log all media. They need to make backup copies. A friend of mine who works at a company called, it'll come back to me in just a second, says if you don't have 2 copies of your media, you don't have 2 copies. And even if you've got it stored somewhere on your hard disk, if you can't find it, you don't have it. So what you want to make sure is that you can find it and you got backup copies. You want to create dailies if this has to be sent out to multiple people in a production team, often with burned-in timecode. You need to distribute the dailies to key production team members and safely transfer the media from set to post-production. I recently finished a 13-part series We made 2 RAID 1s, so I had essentially 4 copies of all of my media. I put them in 2 different cars and had both cars drive back to the office. You know, not that I was worried or anything, but I couldn't afford to shoot that production twice. I'd invested everything I had, blew it all on that 3-day shoot, and there was no way I was going to have the money to go back and reshoot if something got lost. One of the big buzzwords you're going to hear around the show is the cloud. We want to store media to the cloud. We want to talk about the cloud, and the cloud is really sexy. That's a great word, the cloud. I like the cloud. What the cloud is a server stored in somebody's data closet over which you have no control. And we simply use internet protocols to transfer our file from our local hard disk up to the cloud. It's essentially storing critical company documents on a device over which I have no control and I can't put my hands on. I'm not a big fan of the cloud. I'm really dubious about the cloud. The cloud can be very useful in pre-production and in production, as in script development and script collaboration, sharing production files and call sheets and all the stuff that's involved in producing a show. But bandwidth limitations and, most importantly, security remain big obstacles to me of putting my media files up on the cloud. Issues like what happens when Amazon goes down, which happens on a regular basis. What happens if the company that's managing my files goes out of business? Who actually owns my files when it's stored on somebody else's server? Where is it written, the specific ownership and legal contractual rights of a company going out of business with my media? There's just too many opportunities for a screw-up. A system operator decides to get angry and releases everything on the server because he's angry with his boss, and all of a sudden it's public domain. I've got no control here. Now, there will be people on the show floor that absolutely disagree with that point of view. They say the cloud is wonderful. That's fine. They can use the cloud. I'm a bit more skeptical. There's 2 ways that we have to capture media. We can transfer media from the camera source, whether that's a camera card or an SSD, directly to the computer. Basically, you copy the media from the card to the computer. We'll be talking about that in a minute. Or the second option is that you can bypass the compression on the camera and capture to a third-party device. The advantages are when you're capturing to a third-party device, you have less compression and less image artifacts. And you can store in formats which are much larger, which optimize quality that make editing faster and easier. The disadvantages are the cost of buying extra gear, and it's one extra step in the DIT process. Now, my trip here from LA to BVE is sponsored by Blackmagic Design, and one of the reasons that I wanted to work with them is that they've got 2 pieces of kit that can help. There's this one, which is the HyperDeck Shuttle, and there's this one, which is UltraStudio and its cousin UltraStudio HD. Let's talk about this one first. The HyperDeck Shuttle is a portable video recorder. Smaller than a paperback book, and it's got a slot that you can insert your favorite variety of a solid-state drive, an SSD drive. And I've got 2 of them in my case, and I was in a hurry. I forgot to unpack them. But for those of you that are worried, it's exactly that wide. It's exactly that high, and it just slips inside here like you'd slip in a removable cartridge. And then when you're done, you just slip it right out. Imagine, if you will, that I'm holding a device that I slip in and I slip out. There is the SSD drive. Writes really quickly. The benefit is you've got unlimited storage. As fast as you put in one drive, you can just take it out and put in the next drive. This records in ProRes, it records in DNX HD, and it records uncompressed as a .mov file. So what you do is you take the HDMI or the HDSDI out of your camera, bypassing the entire compression inside the camera. You're taking a completely uncompressed signal off the sensor, coming in here. HDMI gives you video and audio. HDSDI gives you video, audio, and timecode. You record it here, and then you put it into a sled, which is a little device that just sort of connects via Thunderbolt to your computer, and you copy the files across. Or the other option is you bypass the SSD completely. The UltraStudio essentially replaces what used to be a PCIe card. If you remember, in your tower, we would plug in a DeckLink card. The DeckLink card would have a bunch of ports on the back of it, and we'd plug in our deck to the... This is exactly the same thing, except now it's in a standalone box. I have a breakout cable which gives me access to analog video, composite component. It gives me access to AES, EBU audio, analog video. I've got HDSDI in, HDSDI out, so I can loop through here and feed a monitor for a video village. I have HDMI, so I can take HDMI in, HDMI out, feed to an HDMI monitor. This essentially bypasses needing to record it to an SSD, comes off the camera, comes through here, goes out Thunderbolt, goes into your computer, and you record to your RAID in the video village that's on set. This is not that expensive either, and the benefit is you don't have that interim step of recording to an SSD. The cool thing about Blackmagic is that Blackmagic loves creating products that work for us at a low cost. There are other companies that make products, but invariably Blackmagic has got the price performance edge over everybody else. And rather than try and set this stuff up here in a 5-second demo, the Blackmagic booth is over at F24. If you're at all interested in this stuff, be sure to take a look at it. It's really cool.